Olivia Carter rushed through the busy airport terminal, pulling her small carry-on suitcase behind her. She was running late for her flight from New York to San Francisco, something that rarely happened to her. As the CEO of Horizon Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in America, Olivia usually kept a tight schedule. But today, her morning meeting had run longer than expected, forcing her to race to the airport with barely enough time to make it through security. Olivia had chosen to wear comfortable clothes for the 6-hour flight instead of her usual business suit. She had on black leggings, a loose gray sweater, and white sneakers. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. After a week of back-to-back meetings in New York, she was looking forward to a quiet flight where she could catch up on work and maybe even get some rest. Final boarding call for Skyline Airlines Flight 307 to San Francisco. The announcement echoed through the terminal as Olivia finally reached her gate. "You made it just in time," the gate agent said with a smile, scanning her boarding pass. "Have a pleasant flight, Miss Carter." Olivia thanked her and hurried down the jet bridge. She was one of the last passengers to board the plane. As she stepped into the aircraft, she was greeted by a flight attendant named Amber Lewis, who welcomed her with a warm smile. "Good morning, and welcome aboard," Amber said. Olivia smiled back and made her way down the aisle to her seat in first class. She had specifically booked a first-class ticket so she could work comfortably during the flight. Her company was launching a new product next week, and she needed to review the presentation materials before the big meeting in San Francisco. As she approached row 3, she saw a middle-aged white man in seat 3B already settled in with his laptop open. Olivia checked her boarding pass again to confirm her seat number. 3A, the window seat. "Excuse me," she said politely to the man as she prepared to step past him to reach her seat. The man looked up and gave a small nod, closing his laptop and standing up to let her through. Olivia stored her small suitcase in the overhead bin and slid into her seat by the window. She had just settled in when another flight attendant approached her row. His name tag read, Greg Peters. Unlike Amber, Greg's expression was stern and unwelcoming. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass?" he asked, his tone suggesting there might be a problem. Olivia reached into her purse and handed him her boarding pass. Greg studied it for a moment longer than necessary, his eyebrows raised slightly. "Is there a problem?" Olivia asked. No problem," Greg said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that first class is usually for our regular business travelers." He handed the boarding pass back to her. "I think you might be more comfortable in economy class. We have some seats available if you'd prefer." The man sitting next to Olivia looked up from his phone, a slight frown crossing his face, as he overheard the comment. "I'm quite comfortable here, thank you," Olivia replied calmly, though she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned her presence in a first-class cabin, and she doubted it would be the last. Greg nodded stiffly. "Very well. Let me know if you need anything." He walked away without offering the same pre-flight drink he had just served to other first-class passengers. The man next to her, who had introduced himself as Kevin Mitchell, gave her a sympathetic look. "First time flying Skyline?" he asked. "No, I fly with them regularly for business," Olivia replied. "Usually on the West Coast routes, though." Kevin nodded. "I'm on this flight almost every month. The service is usually better than this." He lowered his voice. "Greg can be a bit old-fashioned." Olivia understood what Kevin was trying to say. She had encountered plenty of old-fashioned people throughout her career. As one of the few black female CEOs in the tech industry, she had learned to navigate these situations with grace and professionalism, though it never got easier. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration as the plane prepared for takeoff. Olivia tried to focus on the information, though she had heard it countless times before. She noticed that Greg was demonstrating how to use the oxygen mask at the front of first class, his eyes occasionally drifting toward her with a look that made her feel unwelcome. Once the plane was in the air and the seatbelt sign turned off, Olivia reached for the call button to request a glass of water. She had a slight headache and wanted to take some pain medication before starting her work. Greg appeared by her side a few minutes later. Yes? He asked, his tone making the simple word sound like an inconvenience. Could I please have a glass of water? Olivia asked. We'll be starting our beverage service shortly, Greg replied. You can wait until then. Just as he said this, Amber walked by with a tray of drinks for another row in first class. Olivia noticed that Greg had already served several other passengers in first class, including Kevin beside her, who was now sipping a glass of orange juice. I see you've already started the beverage service, Olivia pointed out. I just need some water to take medication. Greg's lips tightened, but he nodded. Fine, I'll be right back. Kevin leaned over slightly. I don't mean to intrude, but would you like me to say something? That's not typical service. Olivia shook her head. Thank you, but I'm used to handling these situations. Greg returned with a plastic cup of water, no ice and no napkin. He practically thrust it at her before quickly moving on to chat with an older white couple across the aisle, asking about their trip and offering them a refill on their drinks, with a completely different, cheerful demeanor. Olivia took her medication and tried to put the interaction out of her mind. She had more important things to focus on. She pulled out her laptop and began reviewing the presentation slides for the product launch. About 30 minutes into the flight, Greg came through the cabin with a snack basket for first-class passengers. He offered it to everyone with a smile and a friendly comment. When he reached Olivia, he simply held out the basket without a word, barely pausing before moving on to the next passenger. Throughout the next hour, Olivia noticed a pattern. Greg would check on other passengers, chatting with them about their destinations or offering drink refills. When he passed her row, he either ignored her completely or gave her the bare minimum of service required. When she requested a coffee, he brought it without cream or sugar, even though she had asked for both. Is everything okay? Kevin asked her quietly as Greg walked away. I've never seen him act like this with other passengers. Olivia gave a small smile. Unfortunately, I have not him specifically, but the behavior is familiar. Kevin looked uncomfortable. That's not right. No, it's not, Olivia agreed. But I've learned to pick my battles. As Olivia continued working on her laptop, she overheard Greg talking to Amber in the galley area, just behind the first class cabin. They were speaking in hushed tones, but the plane was quiet enough that their words carried. I don't understand how some people end up in first class, Greg was saying. Probably using points or got a free upgrade. They never belong here. Amber's response was too quiet to hear, but it seemed like she was disagreeing with him based on her tone. Well, I know a real first-class passenger when I see one, Greg continued. And some people just don't fit the profile no matter what their boarding pass says. Olivia felt her jaw clench. She had worked too hard and accomplished too much to be reduced to someone who didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger. She was the CEO of a company valued at over $1 billion, a company she had built from the ground up. She had earned every success through intelligence, hard work, and determination. Yet here she was, being judged not by her achievements but by her appearance, by the color of her skin and perhaps her casual dress. It was a stark reminder that no matter how high she climbed, some people would always see her as someone who didn't belong. Olivia took a deep breath and returned to her work. She had an important presentation to prepare for, and she wouldn't let Greg's behavior distract her from her goals. But as the flight continued and the pattern of different treatment became impossible to ignore, she began to consider whether she should speak up or let it go, as she had so many times before. What Greg didn't know was that Olivia Carter wasn't just any passenger, and she had the power to make one phone call that would change everything. The flight was now 2 hours in, and Olivia tried to focus on her work despite Greg's continued behavior. She had managed to review half of her presentation slides, making notes on changes she wanted before the big meeting in San Francisco. Her company, Horizon Innovations, was about to launch a new software that could help small businesses compete with larger corporations. It was a project she had personally overseen for the past year, and its success meant everything to her. As lunch service began, Greg moved through the first-class cabin with a tablet, taking meal orders from each passenger. He spent extra time chatting with a young white couple in the first row, laughing at their jokes and offering wine recommendations. When he reached Kevin, he was equally friendly, suggesting the chicken over the pasta. When Greg finally turned, to Olivia his smile disappeared. "Chicken or pasta?" he asked flatly. "What comes with each option?" Olivia asked, a reasonable question that Greg had answered for other passengers without prompting. Greg sighed loudly. "Chicken has vegetables, pasta has sauce." His tone suggested that her question was an annoyance. "I'll take the chicken, please," Olivia said calmly. "And could I have a glass of water with no ice?" "Fine," Greg replied, making a quick note on his tablet before moving on without another word. Kevin glanced at Olivia apologetically. "That's not normal," he whispered. "I've never seen him treat anyone like this." Olivia nodded. "I know." When the meals were served, Amber brought Kevin's tray, complete with a cloth napkin, proper silverware, and a warm bread roll. Greg appeared, moments later with Olivia's tray. Unlike Kevin's meal, hers came with a paper napkin instead of cloth. The bread roll was missing, and there was no salt or pepper. "Excuse me," Olivia called as Greg turned to leave. "Could I have a bread roll? And some salt, please?" Greg turned back, his expression making it clear he found her request bothersome. "We're running low on rolls. I'll check if there are any left after everyone is served." Olivia watched as Greg delivered a bread roll to every other passenger in first class. No one else seemed to be told they were running low. "Here," Kevin said, offering his untouched roll to Olivia. "I'm not going to eat it anyway. I'm trying to cut back on carbs." "Thank you," Olivia said, accepting the roll. "But that's not really the point." Kevin nodded in understanding. "I know. It's completely unprofessional." As Olivia ate her meal, she noticed Greg whispering to another flight attendant while looking in her direction. The other flight attendant, a younger man named Ryan according to his name tag, looked uncomfortable with whatever Greg was saying. After finishing her meal, Olivia continued working on her laptop. The steady clicking of her keyboard keys seemed to bother Greg, who walked by and paused at her row. "Ma'am, could you type more quietly?" "Some passengers are trying to rest," he said. Olivia looked around. Nearly everyone in first class was either working on their own laptops, watching movies, or reading. No one appeared to be sleeping or even trying to sleep. "I'm typing normally," Olivia replied. "And I don't see anyone resting." "Well, I've received complaints," Greg insisted, though it was clear he was lying. Kevin, who had been typing on his own laptop even more loudly than Olivia, stopped and looked up. "I haven't heard any complaints, and I've been sitting right here the whole time," he said. Greg's face tightened. "Just keep it down," he said to Olivia before walking away. Kevin shook his head in disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Olivia took a deep breath and saved her work. She had dealt with this kind of treatment throughout her career. As one of the few black women in tech leadership, she had learned to handle bias with grace and strength. But that didn't make it any easier, or less exhausting. "You know," Kevin said quietly, "I'm a lawyer with Jackson and Powell. We handle discrimination cases. What he's doing is textbook." "I appreciate that," Olivia replied. "But I prefer to handle things my own way." Just as she said this, Greg returned with a fresh round of drinks for the first-class cabin. He served Kevin a scotch on the rocks that he had requested earlier. When he reached Olivia's seat, he somehow lost his grip on a glass of water, spilling it directly onto Olivia's open laptop and the documents she had placed on her tray table. "Oh," Olivia exclaimed, quickly lifting her laptop to prevent further damage. Water dripped from the keyboard and screen. "Sorry about that," Greg said, though his tone lacked any real remorse. He handed her a single napkin, not nearly enough, to clean up the spill. "You should be more careful about where you put your things." Kevin immediately offered his cocktail napkin and pressed his call button for assistance. "That was completely uncalled for," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Amber hurried over with a stack of napkins. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, genuinely concerned as she helped Olivia dry her laptop. Let me get you some more napkins. Thank you, Amber, Olivia said, trying to stay calm as she assessed the damage. Fortunately, her laptop seemed to be functioning, though some of her printed documents were soaked. I should file a report about this, Amber said, glaring at Greg, who had already moved on to serve other passengers. This isn't acceptable. It's fine, Olivia said, though it clearly wasn't. These things happen. But they both knew this wasn't an accident. Greg had been targeting Olivia since she boarded the plane. An older woman across the aisle spoke up. I saw what happened. He practically poured that water on purpose. I've been watching how he's treated you this entire flight, and it's shameful. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. Greg's behavior had become so obvious that multiple people had noticed. Olivia thanked them for their concern, but said little else. She carefully dried her laptop and salvaged what she could of her documents. Inside, however, she had reached her breaking point. This had gone beyond poor service. This was deliberate disrespect. Excuse me, she said to Kevin. I need to use the restroom. As Olivia made her way to the lavatory at the front of the cabin, she felt eyes on her. Some passengers gave her sympathetic looks, while others seemed curious about what she would do next. Greg stood in the galley, barely moving aside to let her pass. Once inside the small lavatory, Olivia locked the door and leaned against the sink. She stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long moment. Her grandmother's words came back to her. Never let them see you sweat, but never let them get away with it either. Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The aircraft had Wi-Fi, and while calls weren't typically allowed, she could use the plane's Wi-Fi calling feature for important matters. This qualified as important. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name she was looking for, Amanda Russell, CEO of Skyline Airlines. They had met at a business conference 3 years ago and had since served together on several corporate boards. They weren't just colleagues, they had become friends who respected each other's work and achievements. Olivia hesitated for just a moment. She didn't want to seem like she was pulling rank or using her connections over something petty. But this wasn't petty. This was about dignity and respect, not just for her but for anyone who might face similar treatment in the future. She pressed the call button and waited. After 3 rings, Amanda's voice came through clearly. Olivia? This is unexpected. Everything, okay? Amanda asked. Actually, no, Olivia replied quietly. I'm calling from one of your planes. What's going on? Amanda's tone shifted to concern. I think we need to talk about one of your flight attendants, Olivia said, and I believe this is something you'll want to address personally. As Olivia began explaining the situation, she had no idea that her single phone call was about to change everything, not just for her but for the entire flight. Amanda Russell sat in her office at Skyline Airlines headquarters in Chicago, reviewing quarterly reports when her phone rang. She was surprised to see Olivia Carter's name on the screen. They were friends and business associates who served on several boards together, but they usually scheduled calls in advance due to their busy lives. Olivia? This is unexpected. Everything okay? Amanda asked, setting aside her paperwork. Actually, no, Olivia replied, her voice sounding slightly muffled. I'm calling from one of your planes. Amanda immediately sat up straighter. What's going on? I think we need to talk about one of your flight attendants, Olivia said, and I believe this is something you'll want to address personally. Over the next few minutes, Olivia explained everything that had happened since she boarded the flight. She described Greg's behavior in detail, how he had questioned her presence in first class, served her differently than other passengers, made comments about her to other crew members, and finally accidentally spilled water on her laptop. Amanda listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly concerned. As the CEO of Skyline Airlines, she had worked hard to create a company culture of respect and excellent service. What Olivia was describing went against everything the airline stood for. I'm not calling to get anyone fired, Olivia clarified. But this kind of behavior shouldn't be happening on your airline, Amanda. Not to me, not to anyone. Absolutely not, Amanda agreed firmly. This is completely unacceptable, and I'm grateful you called me directly. Which flight are you on? Flight 307 from New York to San Francisco. We're about halfway there. Amanda checked her computer and then smiled slightly. That flight has a stopover in Chicago in about 30 minutes. Yes, but I'm staying on until San Francisco. I know, Amanda said, an idea forming in her mind. Olivia, I want you to know I take this very seriously. Would you be comfortable if I handled this personally? Of course, Olivia replied. That's why I called you. Good. I'll need to make some arrangements. In the meantime, go back to your seat and try to enjoy the rest of your flight as best you can. I promise this will be addressed. After they hung up, Amanda immediately called her assistant. Cancel my next 2 meetings, then contact operations, and tell them I'll be boarding Flight 307 during its Chicago stopover. I need to be added to the manifest immediately. She paused. And get me the personnel file for a flight attendant named Greg Peters. Back on the plane, Olivia returned to her seat. Kevin looked at her with concern. Everything okay? He asked. It will be, Olivia said simply, returning to her work. For the next 30 minutes, the flight continued without incident. Greg seemed to be avoiding Olivia's row entirely, having Amber or Ryan serve her instead. Amber had been especially kind since the water incident, making sure Olivia had everything she needed. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport. We'll have a brief stopover of approximately 40 minutes before continuing to San Francisco. All passengers continuing to San Francisco may remain on board during the stopover. As the plane began its descent, Olivia noticed Greg speaking with the lead flight attendant, Patricia Daniels. Patricia looked serious as she listened to whatever Greg was saying. Occasionally, she glanced in Olivia's direction. Olivia suspected Greg was trying to give his version of events before any complaints could be made. The plane landed smoothly at O'Hare and taxied to the gate. Once it came to a complete stop, Patricia made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago. For those continuing on to San Francisco, we ask that you remain seated during our brief stopover. We'll be boarding new passengers for the second leg of our journey. Thank you for your patience. Passengers who were ending their journey in Chicago began collecting their belongings and exiting the aircraft. Meanwhile, Olivia checked her emails on her phone, responding to urgent messages from her team in San Francisco. About 15 minutes into the stopover, Patricia made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest joining us for the flight to San Francisco today. We ask for your patience as we welcome them aboard before general boarding begins. Olivia didn't think much of the announcement until she saw Greg suddenly stand up straighter near the front of the plane. His face had gone pale, and he was frantically straightening his uniform. A moment later, Amanda Russell walked onto the plane. Amanda was dressed in the full Skyline Airlines CEO uniform she sometimes wore during company events. A smart navy blue suit with the airline's insignia and gold stripes indicating her rank. Her presence was commanding but warm as she smiled at the flight crew near the door. Greg looked like he might faint. Patricia seemed surprised but professionally composed as she greeted Amanda. Welcome aboard, Ms. Russell. We weren't expecting you today, Patricia said. I decided to join this flight last minute, Amanda replied loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. I like to experience our service firsthand occasionally. Whispers spread through the cabin as passengers realized the CEO of the airline had just boarded their flight. Kevin leaned over to Olivia. Is that who I think it is? He asked. Amanda Russell, CEO of Skyline, Olivia confirmed quietly. Wow, Kevin said. This doesn't happen every day. Amanda walked slowly down the aisle, greeting passengers and crew with a warm smile. When she reached Olivia's row, she stopped. Dr. Carter, she said formally, but with a friendly tone. What a pleasure to see you on our flight today. Several passengers looked at Olivia with new interest. The Dr. Carter address and Amanda's familiar greeting suggested Olivia was someone important. The pleasure is mine, Ms. Russell, Olivia replied with a small smile. I didn't expect to see you today. I try to fly with our passengers whenever my schedule allows, Amanda explained. It gives me valuable insight into our service. She emphasized the word service slightly. I hope your flight has been comfortable so far. It's had its moments, Olivia said diplomatically. Amanda nodded, understanding the understatement. I'd love to hear your feedback. Perhaps we could chat during the flight to San Francisco. I'd be happy to, Olivia agreed. Greg, who had been watching this exchange from a few rows away, looked increasingly uncomfortable. When Amanda turned from Olivia's seat, she made direct eye contact with him. You must be Greg, she said, her voice pleasant but firm. I'd like to speak with you and Patricia in the galley before we continue to San Francisco. Greg swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. As Amanda, Greg, and Patricia moved to the galley area for their conversation, the other passengers began speculating about what was happening. Kevin turned to Olivia with raised eyebrows. You know the CEO of Skyline Airlines? He asked, impressed. We serve on a few boards together, Olivia explained simply. So that phone call you made, Kevin began, was to a colleague about a service issue, Olivia finished for him. Kevin smiled slowly as understanding dawned. You're not just any passenger, are you? Olivia smiled slightly. I'm the CEO of Horizon Innovations. Kevin's eyes widened in recognition. The tech company? Wait, you're that Olivia Carter? The one who was on the cover of Business Week last month? Olivia nodded modestly. That would be me. From the galley, they could see Amanda speaking firmly to Greg, whose face had gone from pale to red. Though they couldn't hear the conversation, it was clear from his body language that Greg was being called out for his behavior. Patricia looked both serious and embarrassed as she occasionally added to the conversation. Other passengers had noticed the intense discussion as well, and many were watching with interest. The older woman who had spoken up after the water incident caught Olivia's eye and gave her an approving nod. After about 10 minutes, Amanda concluded her conversation with Greg and Patricia. Greg immediately disappeared into the back of the plane while Patricia approached Olivia. Dr. Carter, I want to personally apologize for your experience today, Patricia said sincerely. This is not representative of Skyline Airlines, and I'm deeply sorry for how you were treated. Thank you, Patricia, Olivia replied graciously. As new passengers began boarding for the flight to San Francisco, Amanda took a seat in the economy section. It was clear she intended to observe the entire flight service from a passenger's perspective. Olivia settled back in her seat, feeling a mixture of emotions. She hadn't wanted to make a scene or get anyone in trouble, but she also knew that sometimes the only way to change things was to speak up. Her grandmother had taught her that. As the plane prepared for takeoff to San Francisco, Olivia noticed that Greg was no longer serving the first-class cabin. Instead, Amber and Ryan were providing attentive service to all passengers, regardless of their appearance or background. The flight to San Francisco was about to become very different from the first leg of the journey. The flight from Chicago to San Francisco took off smoothly. The atmosphere in the cabin felt noticeably different now. Passengers who had been on the first leg of the journey whispered to new passengers about what had happened. Many kept glancing back at Amanda Russell, who sat in an aisle seat in economy class, occasionally making notes on a small notepad. In first class, Amber and Ryan now provided the service instead of Greg. They were professional and attentive to all passengers, treating everyone with equal respect and courtesy. Olivia noticed the difference immediately. When Amber offered her a drink, she included a napkin, stirrer, and lemon without Olivia having to ask. Can I get you anything else, Dr. Carter? Amber asked with a genuine smile. This is perfect. Thank you, Olivia replied. Kevin, still seated next to Olivia, shook his head in amazement. I can't believe the CEO of the airline actually came on board to handle this personally. That never happens. Amanda takes customer service very seriously, Olivia said. It's one of the reasons her airline has such a good reputation. Well, except for Greg, Kevin said with a slight laugh. Every company has employees who don't always represent their values, Olivia said thoughtfully. The real test is how leadership responds when problems arise. About an hour into the flight, Amanda made her way from economy to the first-class cabin. She stopped to chat with various passengers along the way, asking about their experience and taking notes. When she reached Olivia's row, she smiled. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" Amanda asked, gesturing to the empty seat across the aisle. "Please do," Olivia replied. Amanda sat down and turned to face Olivia. "First, I want to apologize again for what happened. There's absolutely no excuse for how you were treated." "I appreciate that," Olivia said. "Though I'm sorry if my call disrupted your day." Amanda waved off the apology. "Never apologize for bringing this kind of issue to my attention. That's exactly what I needed to know about." She lowered her voice slightly. "Greg has been with the airline for 20 years. In many ways, he's a product of a different era in the industry. But that's no excuse." "What will happen to him?" Olivia asked, concerned. Despite everything, she didn't want to be responsible for someone losing their job. "That's still to be determined," Amanda replied. "For now, he's been reassigned to work in the galley for the remainder of this flight. After we land, he'll be placed on administrative leave while we conduct a full review. Patricia will be filing a formal report, and several passengers have already offered to provide statements about what they witnessed." Olivia nodded. "I think that's fair." "What's not fair is what you experienced," Amanda said firmly. "And I suspect this isn't the first time something like this has happened on one of our flights. It's just the first time it happened to someone who could reach me directly." This statement made Olivia think. As a CEO herself, she understood the challenge of knowing what was really happening throughout a large organization. Sometimes it took an incident like this to expose deeper issues. "You know," Olivia said thoughtfully. "At Horizon, we recently implemented a new training program focused on unconscious bias. It's been remarkably effective, especially with our customer service teams." Amanda's eyes lit up with interest. "I'd love to hear more about that. Maybe there's something we could adapt for our flight crews." "I'd be happy to have my team share our materials with your training department," Olivia offered. "That would be wonderful," Amanda said. "Perhaps we could discuss it further over dinner once we land in San Francisco. I'm staying overnight before flying back to Chicago tomorrow." "I'd like that," Olivia agreed. Their conversation was interrupted when Patricia approached with a concerned expression. "Ms. Russell, we have a situation in the rear cabin," she said quietly. "A passenger is having what appears to be an anxiety attack about flying. The medical kit has been opened, but we wanted to make you aware." "Thank you, Patricia. I'll come take a look," Amanda said, standing up. To Olivia, she added, "Duty calls. We'll talk more later." As Amanda walked to the back of the plane with Patricia, Olivia returned to her work. The incident with Greg had taken up much of her attention, but she still needed to finish reviewing her presentation for tomorrow's meeting. Kevin, who had been politely pretending not to listen to Olivia's conversation with Amanda, now turned to her. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened earlier." "Oh?" Olivia looked up from her laptop. "I've been flying first class for years, and I've never been treated the way Greg treated you. Never had my right to be there questioned. Never been denied the same service as other passengers. Never had water accidentally spilled on my things." "I wish I could say the same," Olivia replied. "That's exactly my point," Kevin said. "I've never had to deal with that because I'm a white man in a suit. It's easy for people like me to think these things don't happen anymore because we don't see them happening to us." Olivia appreciated his self-awareness. The first step to solving any problem is acknowledging it exists. "Well, I saw it exist today," Kevin said, "and it was eye-opening." Their conversation was interrupted when Amber announced that lunch would be served soon. The flight continued smoothly, with Amanda occasionally walking through the cabin, observing the service and chatting with both passengers and crew. About an hour before landing, Amanda returned to the front of the plane and asked for Patricia's attention. They spoke quietly for a few minutes before Patricia nodded and picked up the intercom phone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of Skyline Airlines, Amanda Russell, would like to address you briefly before we begin our descent into San Francisco." The cabin grew quiet as Amanda took the phone. "Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank you for choosing to fly with Skyline Airlines today. As some of you may know, I occasionally join flights to experience our service firsthand and connect with our passengers. Today's flight has been particularly instructive. She paused briefly before continuing. At Skyline, we pride ourselves on providing excellent service to all of our passengers, without exception. It has come to my attention that earlier today we fell short of that standard. For that, I sincerely apologize. Murmurs spread through the cabin as passengers who had witnessed Greg's behavior nodded in understanding. I want to assure you that we take these matters very seriously. Skyline Airlines is committed to treating every passenger with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, gender, race, or any other factor. That's not just a policy on paper. It's a value we must live by every day on every flight. Amanda's words were met with scattered applause from passengers who appreciated her directness. I also want to thank those of you who spoke up when you saw something that wasn't right. It takes courage to do that, and it helps us become better. If any of you ever experience or witness service that falls short of our standards, please don't hesitate to let us know. She handed the phone back to Patricia and returned to her seat in economy. The message had been clear. What happened to Olivia was unacceptable, and the airline's leadership was taking responsibility. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Olivia felt a sense of satisfaction. She hadn't called Amanda seeking an apology or to get Greg in trouble. She had called because what happened was wrong, and addressing it might prevent someone else from experiencing the same treatment in the future. Outside the window, the San Francisco skyline came into view, bathed in afternoon sunlight. For Olivia, the city represented opportunity, both for her company's new product launch and perhaps now for positive change at Skyline Airlines too. The plane touched down at San Francisco International Airport right on schedule. As passengers prepared to disembark, Amber approached Olivia's seat. "Dr. Carter, Ms. Russell has asked if you would mind waiting until other passengers have exited. She'd like to speak with you briefly before you leave." "Of course," Olivia agreed. When the last passenger had left, Amanda approached Olivia's seat with a warm smile. "Ready for that dinner tonight? I think we have a lot to talk about." Olivia nodded, gathering her belongings. What had started as an unpleasant flight experience had somehow transformed into an opportunity for meaningful change. Sometimes, she reflected, that's exactly how progress happens, one uncomfortable moment at a time. 3 weeks had passed since the incident on the flight. Olivia sat in her office at Horizon Innovations headquarters in San Francisco, reviewing the final numbers from their successful product launch. The new software had exceeded sales expectations, and the tech press was full of positive reviews. She should have been focused entirely on this triumph, but her mind kept drifting back to that flight and her dinner with Amanda afterward. The dinner had been productive. They had spent hours discussing not just what happened on the flight, but also the larger issues it represented. Amanda had been genuinely interested in Horizon's unconscious bias training program and how it might be adapted for Skyline Airlines. By the end of the evening, they had outlined a plan for collaboration between their companies. Olivia's assistant knocked on her office door, interrupting her thoughts. "Dr. Carter, you have a delivery," she said, carrying in a large envelope with the Skyline Airlines logo. "Thank you, Lisa," Olivia said, taking the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Amanda and several documents. The note read, "Olivia, I wanted you to be the first to know about the changes we're implementing at Skyline. Your experience, though unfortunate, has sparked important improvements in our company. I'm grateful for your willingness to share your expertise and help us do better. With appreciation, Amanda." The attached documents outlined Skyline's new training program, developed with input from Horizon's HR team. It included comprehensive modules on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and inclusive customer service. There was also a press release announcing the program, scheduled for release the following day. Olivia smiled as she read through the materials. This was exactly the kind of positive change she had hoped might come from the incident. As a business leader, she knew that true progress often required difficult moments that forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. Her phone rang. It was Amanda. Did you receive the package? Amanda asked when Olivia answered. Just now. I'm impressed with how quickly you've put this together, Olivia replied. We had good guidance, Amanda said. But that's not the only reason I'm calling. I thought you should know about Greg. Olivia tensed slightly. She had wondered what had happened to the flight attendant but hadn't asked. What about him? After a thorough review, we decided not to terminate his employment, Amanda said. Instead, he's been reassigned to a ground position where he'll be helping to develop and implement our new training program. Really? Olivia was surprised. Yes. During our review process, we discovered that Greg has received multiple complaints over the years for similar behavior, but they were never properly addressed by previous management. The system failed him as much as it failed our passengers. That's a thoughtful approach, Olivia said. He actually asked to meet with you to apologize in person, Amanda continued. I told him that would be entirely up to you. Olivia considered. This. I'd be willing to meet with him. I thought you might say that, Amanda said. There's one more thing. A passenger from your flight posted about the incident on social media last week. It's getting a lot of attention. Olivia sighed. She had hoped to avoid public attention over this. How bad is it? Actually, it's quite positive, Amanda said. The passenger praised both your dignity in handling the situation and my response as CEO. It's being held up as an example of how companies should address these issues. After the call ended, Olivia searched for the social media post. It had been shared thousands of times and had generated a conversation about bias in customer service across all industries. Most comments were supportive, though some questioned whether one incident warranted such attention. A week later, Olivia met with Greg at a quiet cafe near her office. He looked different in civilian clothes, smaller somehow, and visibly nervous. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Dr. Carter, he said as they sat down. I know you didn't have to do this. I believe in second chances, Mr. Peters, Olivia replied, and in the power of direct conversation. Greg looked down at his coffee. I've been with Skyline for 20 years. In all that time, no one ever called me out the way you did. No one with enough power to make me face what I was doing anyway. And what were you doing? Olivia asked calmly. Greg met her eyes. I was judging people based on how they looked. I told myself I was just identifying real first-class passengers, but the truth is, I had a picture in my mind of who belonged there. And it didn't include people who looked like you. His honesty was surprising. What changed? Being forced to see it, Greg said. When Ms. Russell came on that plane and addressed you as Dr. Carter, when I realized who you were, it was like a mirror was held up to my behavior. I couldn't look away anymore. That's a start, Olivia said. I know an apology isn't enough, Greg continued. That's why I asked to be part of the new training program. I want to help other employees avoid making the same mistakes. My story can be a teaching tool. Olivia nodded. That's a good use of your experience. Their conversation continued for nearly an hour. Greg wasn't looking for forgiveness, just a chance to apologize directly and show he was committed to change. Olivia appreciated his sincerity. As spring turned to summer, the collaboration between Horizon Innovations and Skyline Airlines continued to grow. The training program was implemented across all Skyline employees, and early results showed a significant improvement in customer satisfaction scores, particularly among minority passengers. Olivia and Amanda met regularly, not just about the training program, but as friends and allies in their respective industries. They began speaking together at business conferences about corporate responsibility and inclusive leadership. 6 months after the incident, Olivia boarded another Skyline flight, this time from San Francisco to New York. As she settled into her first-class seat, she was greeted warmly by a flight attendant who showed no hint of surprise or judgment at her presence there. Welcome aboard, Dr. Carter, the attendant said with a genuine smile. Can I get you anything before takeoff? Just water, thank you, Olivia replied. Of course, and just so you know, our CEO has a message for you. The attendant handed Olivia a small envelope. Inside was a note from Amanda. 6 months, 247 flights, and not a single bias complaint. Progress is possible. Thank you for making that call. A. Olivia smiled and tucked the note into her bag. As the plane prepared for takeoff, she thought about how a single difficult moment had sparked meaningful change. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her to stand up for herself while maintaining her dignity. And she thought about all the other passengers who might never know why their experience on Skyline had improved, but who would benefit. Nonetheless, the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky. Olivia watched the ground fall away through her window. From this height, individual people weren't visible, just the structures they built together, the roads they traveled, the patterns they created across the landscape. Change, she reflected, often worked the same way. Individual actions, when part of a larger pattern, could transform entire systems. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from her assistant, confirming her meeting with a potential new client the next day. Olivia switched her focus back to business. She had a company to run, after all. But she knew that the work she and Amanda had started would continue, creating ripples far beyond that one uncomfortable flight. Sometimes the most important calls weren't the ones on your calendar, but the ones you decided to make when something wasn't right. Those were the calls that could change everything.